All right, well, thank you very much everyone for being here. This Decomplex webinar is a research-based approach to community messaging around COVID-19 vaccination. The description reads, social media has emerged as an easy way for people throughout the world to communicate. This spreads information, both true and false, very quickly and broadly. In this discussion-based webinar, we will focus on the community mapping tools that we use for identifying online tension points, high propagation accounts, and channels by which to reach and engage the community. I hope that you leave this webinar with a little bit more information on how you can do these things on your own, and that in the perspective that we're bringing, you can bring back out into the world as well. All right, so this webinar is recorded, just so everyone knows. We do ask if you can keep yourself muted. We'd appreciate that. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. And we will either answer them as we're just having the discussion or have some time at the end so we can do a little bit of Q&A. So our mission statement at Decomplex is we use mixed methods research to help stakeholders understand the social cybersecurity information landscape so that they can make decisions on how to mitigate the effects of inauthentic online behavior, which could also be considered disinformation. We're really focused on this. Our vision is to uncover the truth to protect our democracy. We believe in it deeply, that uncovering what is actually happening, people that are trying to influence us in ways that maybe are nefarious. We think it's important to be transparent, and so our mission is to uncover the truth so that we can help protect our democracy. So we have a few panelists here. These are internal Decomplex resources. Jimmy Rodriguez, Katie Wilson, and Shannon Pearson. Jimmy is our subject matter expert on influence operations. He is an Army veteran of 20 years with an MA in Nonproliferation and Terrorism Studies from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. As a military information support operations practitioner, he has acquired a wealth of experience in the analysis of foreign adversary influence operations to include the direct production and implementation of actions taken to influence foreign audiences. His experience includes 3 tours in Iraq, 1 peacekeeping deployment in Kosovo, and multiple exercises, training assignments domestically and internationally. He will be addressing the fundamental concepts needed to better understand influence operations in the contemporary information environment that we operate in today. Katie Wilson, she is our Director of Research and Evaluation and specializes in mixed methods and qualitative research. At Decomplex, she designs research methodologies and qualitative instruments, including for our work on Monterey County elections and disinformation. Katie's research expertise includes professional research and evaluation work in the education sector. And we have Shannon Pearson, is our research associate and specializes in analyzing the impact of disinformation campaigns as well as policy regulating social media. She served as a research assistant at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, where she studied disinformation campaigns targeting women in the public. She has consulted on multiple projects for the Microsoft Corporation's Defending Democracy program on international election security and internet governance legislation. Ms. Pearson holds a degree in international studies from the University of Washington and will continue on to Oxford Internet Institute this fall for a graduate degree. And myself, I will be facilitating this discussion today. I'm the founder and CEO of Decomplex. I have 15 years of work experience in the Air Force, public sector, nonprofit, and private sectors. I'm an alumni of the Middlebury Institute as well, just like Jimmy and Katie. And I studied, I got my master's in public administration with a focus in policy and program evaluation. I've led a few social network analysis projects in the private and nonprofit corporations, and I've honed my IT skills over the past 10 years and have led successful large-scale IT projects and research projects for clients that range from small insurance companies to multinational corporations. All right, with all that said, I'd like to kick it off and begin the discussion with our panelists. So kind of going in line with the topic or the title of this webinar, Jimmy, why is it important to rely on research-based messaging when engaging with the community? Like, for example, when sharing information about COVID-19 vaccination?
Typically, we see what we have in front of us, the information we get, it's going to be more upfront, surface level, meaning without research, we can't really dig in and see who the real trusted communicators are in a location or a certain neighborhood. So without that research, without the investigation and analysis of that community, you're not going to know like where to begin. So when you have a campaign and you're looking to see where to begin propagating messaging, it tends to be very linear, very one-dimensional. So when we layer on multiple layers of communicators, messaging, so you get this like holistic package. All that requires research, and if the research isn't thorough, and you do find some trusted members of the community that people really respond to, you'll also find it difficult to implement that.
Now, when you say respond to,
right,
you mean respond to a campaign, a COVID information campaign?
Respond in general, just
in general.
That trusted member of the community that has gravitas, where people lean to. They aren't necessarily always upfront, like they're not going to be readily identified. And we just don't know until we do that research. And an example of that would be maybe there's a certain individual in a neighborhood that a lot of people are influenced by, but they don't have social media accounts and they don't do anything social media based, but they still hold a lot of influence in that community. Without getting in there and doing interviews, doing like information landscape survey, you can't really see those elements otherwise.
Got it. And that is important because if we don't see those elements, we may not be able to get out of this pandemic in the case of COVID, because, well, I guess it depends on your philosophy, but we believe that vaccines are going to help us get to that. So influencing, using the truth, and using research-based is the way that we can actually possibly get out of this pandemic, right?
Exactly. And the other benefit from a very research-based messaging campaign that has multiple layers, that stays away from being one-dimensional, you'll be able to, I lost my train of thought, but
no worries.
You had mentioned something about
using the truth to influence to get that to come to an end of this pandemic.
Yeah.
So, using the research that we
exactly. So it helps to, well, it acts as a barrier or a cleanser of mental traps. So when you have that solid information from research, you can start shedding a lot of those mental traps we have, a lot of assumptions that would obfuscate our campaign and make it ultimately very difficult to get to that end state we're looking for. So for example, here, if we're looking to get a 70% or above vaccination of the population, that goal, that end state, getting there would be a lot more difficult if we go in it with already preconceived notions on how people communicate, who key communicators are, etc. So it it's all about getting all those different elements in that information environment and finding how to mold your messaging into it. So it takes into account all those different layers.
Absolutely. I would love to hear from Shannon in terms of some examples of how people can be moved by digital communications. So we're talking about moving people to potentially help us end this pandemic, but can you talk about any examples of when communications have spread quickly, and how you've investigated that, and how you would normally monitor it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if Emily just wants to switch over to the next slide. Yeah, so that's a great question. I do have an example, one you're probably not really expecting, given it's a Sharpie, but it's an example from the November 2020 presidential election. On election day and afterwards, the kinds of misinformation that researchers like me and Jimmy were Katie, were monitoring online. The situations that we were seeing floating around were largely related to vote counting and tabulation. There were plenty of rumors and viral videos and tweets suggesting that ballots were being dumped or deliberately invalidated. While many of these rumors were untrue and intended to sow doubt in the integrity of the election, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, dubbed this the most secure election in American history. So there was one instance of misinformation that translated to offline action that I kind of wanted to go into, and it's called Sharpiegate. It happened in Arizona, Arizona's Maricopa County. It started with a viral video posted on Facebook. This video, which I'll be able to show you guys, purports an unsubstantiated narrative that poll workers were given felt tip Sharpie pens to voters. Voters were given those pens in conservative precincts in order to invalidate their ballots. So I thought that maybe I could show the video to you guys.
Sure, let's see it.
So explain one more time.
So the people that were in front of me, there were two people in front of me that used the Sharpie.
Yes.
That was given to them by the poll worker.
Yes.
It did not read their ballot.
Okay.
And they slid it in there twice. I used the pen.
Yep.
Took their Sharpie and threw it away.
And it read your ballot.
And it read my ballot.
And it read your ballot.
And it read my
So
ballot.
what they're doing is they're telling people to use the Sharpies. That way,
Yes.
those votes aren't counted.
Yes.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
So there was other people that were in there voting with their pens, and they literally went around and they were yanking pens out of their hands.
Yes. They tried to do.
Right. So for the record, these claims are untrue. Arizona election officials confirm that there are processes in place to ensure the ballots are counted, regardless of what kind of writing implement is used to fill them out. But the narrative did catch like wildfire on social media platforms over the course of election day, the next morning as well. The video was reposted by numerous accounts and then appeared on YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Parler, and Reddit. So after West Coast polls closed and it became apparent that certain swing states, particularly Arizona, were closer than polls had predicted, the controversy about Sharpies was kind of offered as an explanation and kind of gained steam. So the misinformation actually received hundreds of thousands of interactions on Twitter and in local Facebook groups. The misinformation was also laundered by news outlets, verified users with huge exponential reach, and also interested political actors in order to sow doubt in the integrity of the vote, just to hypothesize and just kind of put it out there and sow doubt. So if you could go a couple of slides forward, that's an example of how it kind of spread in Facebook groups. There were a lot of posts like this that I was monitoring, and a lot of disinformation researchers were monitoring. And then the next slide. So Maricopa County's election department repeatedly debunked the theory. They tried to get the word out, but the damage had kind of already been done. Fact checks never travel as far as disinformation does. It's just not as engaging, so it's not necessarily rewarded by the algorithm. Also, I don't know many people who follow the elections departments in their local precincts, But after Sharpiegate kind of gained traction, it ultimately led to offline action in the form of protests outside of accounting center. If you could go to the next slide. So it drew hundreds of protesters outside of the recorder's office of Arizona's Maricopa County. You'll see Alex Jones there. He runs InfoWars. So a false, inaccurate rumor created this and sowed a lot of doubt in the integrity of the election. So, I mean, thanks to social media, like we all have real-time information a lot faster. That information travels farther and is injected into the public discourse instantaneously. However, that information doesn't necessarily get fact-checked. It isn't fact-checked as it reaches engagement and is distributed to millions and thousands of people. So to answer Justin's question about like how do disinformation researchers kind of track this information, we use a lot of different platforms, CrowdTangle being one of them, and this great new product that that D-Complex is putting out there to kind of monitor like what is the weather on Twitter, like in the information environment, as well as like what is the weather on CrowdTangle. Those are essentially like social media search tools so that I or a researcher can kind of see like what's happening in this particular Facebook group, what is trending, what posts are performing highly. And you're able to kind of identify like if I searched hashtag Sharpiegate, a lot of posts would come up kind of compounding this theory, laundering it, and you can kind of measure how many mentions on Facebook that it was mentioned. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for laying that out for us and giving us a real world example. There's actually a lot more real world examples out there. There was a situation in Watsonville where a flyer circulated and the town shut down for a couple of days during the George Floyd protests. And so Shannon mentioned that the information spread in a way that drove an action in the real world. So the tools that we are trying to use internally are going to help us monitor, just like she was mentioning, and also analyze. And so I wanted to show the participants in this call a couple of tools that you can build on your own and use it to analyze in your work as well. So let me pull that up here. I'm going to present on this screen over here. So this right here is what's called a Power BI dashboard. It's a Microsoft product, and it could connect to a multitude of information sources. Currently, we have it connected to an SQL database, an Azure database that that we use to store tweets specifically in geographic locations. Right now, this is where we're collecting information in these locations. This shows you the number of tweets that are present in this table. And this table is, you can actually export the data right here. You can only export up to 150,000 rows at a time. It's date-based, so we can spread this out all the way through May of last year is when we actually kicked it off. And so we have that data through there. And then this shows you the potential reach that all the tweets combined could have been viewed. Number of times a tweet could have been viewed, taking all the potential followers that it could have passed through or be seen by. And this right here is a network sociogram. We use network science, social network analysis to look at a network and analyze it. This one is really sweet. It has limitations, but every time you update a filter, this will recalculate and pull the most connected nodes within that data set. There are some limitations, but I'm going to show you how we're going to get around those in a second. So over here you have Monterey County. I can filter down all the tweets specifically during this time period. Let's just see for March, mainly for March. We can do that. So when we look closer here at these nodes, these are accounts. So if you click one, we will see this is this person named Perez. What are they talking about? We can monitor. There's nothing really that were of interest here for us. However, we are of interest of COVID or vaccine related information. So I'm going to go over here to our filter and quickly just type in the word COVID. Oops. And click filter. And now you can see up here, these are all refreshing, and the data is going to be filtered down based on that keyword. And looks like, let me just uncheck this. Looks like this is the network in Monterey. Only 2,900 tweets between March 1st to the 30th, potential reach. And these are all the tweets that they were discussing in terms of that dealt with the word COVID. Now we can look through here and try to find misinformation. We actually do know of a specific misinformer, disinformation spreader, an avid one here in the Monterey Bay area. Let's see if it pops up here. All right, turn out. Let's see here. All right, that person did not show up in this graph right now, but that's okay. You can use it to find specific accounts or monitor the text to see if any disinformation is spreading. You can do it off of keyword. You can do it off of location. You can also resize these. So I did mention that we do have another way of getting around the limitations of this Network Explorer. It only shows you a certain amount of data. So it's pretty limited. You know, when you're dealing with small data sets like this, you can pull in all the data into the graph. But when you're dealing with over, let's see, we'll just filter down to, 9,000, that's not too much. Let's go all the way back to July. So you can see this little icon, it says too many values. So it does filter it down. So to get around that, we have this new product that we're working on. And if you're interested in being a early adopter and would like to try it out, please let us know. It's open to the public at the moment, but we'll be putting some login information around it soon. So here we have high propagation accounts. So those are essentially these accounts that have a high amount of connections, you can call them. Retweets, they're people who can spread information far into a network. So we call them high propagation accounts. So let's look at June 10th, 2020 and June 10th, 2020. Let's just look on that day in Monterey and let's see what this graph finds for us today. So here is a network graph. So pretty similar to what you see here. It's smaller, clearly, a little less data set, but what this one will do is it will not cut off the data as you expand the filter. And you can analyze this a little further and see what types of accounts these are in terms of people who are communicating. When we look closer here, it's actually really clear that these are official key communicators in the community. This is the Paso Robles Police Department. This is a reporter. This is a local news station. So upon further closer analysis, we can see that this network on that day, there was no keywords. They spread the furthest into the network, this connection of nodes here. Nodes are accounts, we'll call them. Okay, so I wanted to now show you our presentation. Go back to the presentation real quick, Emily, and I wanted to explain SNA just a little bit deeper.
Oh, may I chime in, Justin?
Yeah, please. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of stress the importance of how we're looking at these accounts as high propagation sources, where information is being pushed out at a high level, and making sure we're not associating that with influence or a degree of influence, because sometimes just because you spread a lot of information doesn't necessarily mean it's influential. It could just be noise. For example, you'll see leaflet drops take place over North Korea. Are they effective? Are they inert? We don't know until we do the research to determine the degree of influence. So we wouldn't want to say that that mass leaflet drop was influential because we just don't know. We have to create the metrics. We have to look at impact indicators, and that takes a lot of effort. So it's really important to not look at a source of information like these propagation accounts, high propagation accounts, as influencers.
Right.
We have to be careful to first do that research and then make a determination whether or not they're influential. And also, what makes that work difficult is institutional bias will cloud the accuracy of that research. So if you're in the public sector doing government work, they're going to have a very strict way of measuring an impact. Mm-hmm. If you go into the private sector, they're going to have a completely different way of doing it. So understanding how that methodology influences your measurement is also key to that. Not just saying, okay, I got the list of things I'm supposed to measure. Mm-hmm. You got to really think about it as like, how is this methodology impacting the information I'm going to get from this research? And then you can determine a degree of influence.
Absolutely. And that is exactly why we call them high propagation and not influencers, because influencers are another level of analysis. They are specific roles in a community that can actually help push an objective forward in a different way than maybe an account that's just spreading a whole bunch of information. Right, Jimmy? Did you say? Okay, thanks. I got the point. So I wanted to show real quick so we just showed the tools online about using the Power BI tool to monitor, and then the DISDash to help analyze. But the DISDash, we're going to keep developing it and add on features, but what you're going to be able to do is take this blob and make some more sense of it. What we're looking at here is what we were seeing kind of in the Power BI report. This is a sociogram, it's called, in social network analysis, and you can make meaning out of it by diving in and kind of analyzing the different groups and who is closest to who and who is sharing the type of different information. So can you go to the next slide real quick? And so there's a few algorithms that we're tying into the DISDash, so everyone else can do them too, but this algorithm was able to find distinct, not too distinct, as you can tell, there's connections between the groups, but these are generally homogeneous types of groups where these types of accounts share amongst each other. And when we look a little closer, on the right-hand side, you see John Devine. That person is an avid sports reporter here in the community, very popular. If you look at the person next to him, MCOE is in education, Monterey Department of Education. And it's interesting that they're in the same spot, but it actually makes sense that they're probably sharing similar things regarding schools. So you can find distinct groups and then analyze a little further in terms of what content is being presented in these groups. So let's go to the next slide. Now, if we dive in a little closer to one of those groups, we found this group, which is an echo chamber. Everything on social media is an echo chamber, as we've learned. And there's nothing wrong with that, having echo chambers. But echo chambers are areas that are vulnerabilities for viral information to spread. So Shannon was mentioning how information spread virally. They spread through echo chambers. Our tools are configured to pull geographic data, geolocation-based data. So we're looking at Monterey County specific echo chamber, which may not be the same as Santa Cruz County, which is next to us. So when we were to look at them side by side, we would assess a higher risk depending on what the issue is. In this case, we're looking at an immigration network in front of us, and not a nice immigration network. Everyone's really pointed. This is right before the election, and it was a very intense conversations happening here. But these were people talking about immigration. They're different colors, the purple is a specific political orientation, and the orange is a specific political orientation that we labeled them. And so it just proves concretely this is an echo chamber around a tension point of immigration. And so you can use social network analysis to kind of uncover the truth, as we say. You can uncover these patterns. You can see concretely specific vulnerabilities that may exist in a specific area. So I want to move on now. Let's see here. So I mentioned that we use SNA to identify online communities of interest. I just showed you those communities. So Katie, can you talk about how we use qualitative research to further understand groups in our community?
Yeah, for sure. So Justin, you and Shannon have kind of outlined some of the more quantitative tools that we use to dig into disinformation and information being spread online. Jimmy kind of described research in a more holistic way that includes qualitative research, whether he said that or not, because understanding the information environment online and offline often requires more of a why. There's an adage in research that quantitative research can give you the what and qualitative research can give you the why, and we definitely believe in the combination of those two. So for example, with Shannon's example of Sharpiegate, we might look at that and see that that incident was prompting folks who saw it to believe a certain way, or we might dig in with qualitative research and find out that it was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and like the tipping point for them, or maybe it was all of it, but that's not something we can necessarily learn with quantitative tools alone. And in addition, related to COVID, so say we're running a campaign related to COVID vaccination, there are a ton of reasons why people might not trust vaccines, and we might tend to group those people into a group, and we might say, we might start to see certain demographics or people in certain zip codes registering to get the vaccine at lesser rates. And when we really dig in with qualitative research, we might find out that it's not a homogeneous group. There could be medical reasons for not trusting vaccines. There could be cultural and historic reasons. There could also be mis and disinformation on the internet or mistrust in the government. And it's not a homogeneous reason that people aren't registering. So that's kind of where we come in with qualitative research. I'm going to share. This is the output from one of the surveys we did back in the fall, and while it wasn't COVID specific, it does have some relevance to what we're looking at now. And another cool thing about this report is that we can dig through qualitative data with our clients this way and not just see it in, a traditional verbose report view. This can be a lot more useful to folks. But something we did find, so we were interested in looking at not just the types of information that people were seeing online via our quantitative tools, but also how much folks in Monterey County trusted that information that they were getting and from the different sources. And something we found, perhaps not surprisingly, was that younger voters use social media more than older voters. TikTok in particular, we see that, I'm on their young group right here, we see that about 45% of those voters never use TikTok, whereas our older voters, it almost doubles for those that don't use TikTok. And this was interesting to us because we also found that younger voters were more likely to trust the information that they found on the internet. And that could be for a variety of reasons. The survey didn't dive into that, and it might be good follow-up research, but it kind of tells us, it hints at a group that might be interesting to track and find out more from related to COVID-19 vaccinations. This is a group that's getting a lot more information from the internet, and that tends to trust that information more than other groups. So this can be really relevant for vaccine campaigns in particular, and many other things.
Can I jump in real quick? That I just wanted to touch on your point earlier about the age group, the younger age group being active on social media. That right there is a good example of having research to back up that statement of younger people use social media. That may seem like it's an obvious thing, and it may be, but it's important to have the data to support it anyway. Like, you don't want to just assume that that's the case, because maybe if we shift over to Barstow, California, or maybe if we shift over to Los Angeles, we're going to see different trends, or we might see the same. But we want to make sure we have that information first before we make that assertion. So it's that, and I really appreciate you brought that up, Katie, because you hear that a lot in this field. It's like, oh yeah, I have this assumption about X and Y, but then you ask, well, where's your data to support that assumption? And then it's, well, I know a guy. Okay, you have anecdotal evidence, one person, one individual. So that's not enough to support these views that we have of an information environment. And we can also, even if we find something obvious like that, that gives us a baseline. So now we can start tracking and seeing what trends may take place. So right now there's this like emerging group of people that are starting to avoid social media altogether, that are younger age. Some of them like to, and this is anecdotal evidence, purchase mobile phones that are only for calling and they don't have any other functions. So it's just like the old school early 2000s flip phones that certain groups are now starting to become attracted to. And that's the kind of trend you can start looking for if originally you saw everyone between 18 and 25 communicates on Twitter. And then 3 years later, you see 50% of the people communicate on Twitter. And if you're not tracking that and you're just constantly thinking everyone talks on Twitter, then when you're crafting your messaging campaign, you're gonna most likely use the wrong platforms, inevitably making it harder to get to that end state, that desired end state.
If we were using, this is going towards Katie, if we were using a certain platform, how would we, to get our message out there, we have a certain strategy, how would we monitor and evaluate, let's say like a COVID messaging project?
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jimmy. And I think that really speaks to how the combination of qualitative and quantitative data is so important for understanding the totality of the information environment. And that comes in, Justin, when kind of evaluating a messaging campaign. So we at dComplex have a very robust consulting process with our clients. We go back and forth a lot, and every project is unique. So even within COVID-19 messaging, there are very unique circumstances and goals. So we work with our clients to talk about those goals and set indicators that we can actually track that are related to the project. So for example, if I was setting an indicator for messaging around COVID-19, it might be different if it was related to actual like vaccine supply and distribution than if it was related to just generating interest amongst the public in the COVID-19 vaccine. So for example, I might set something like, we will see a 20% increase in vaccinated residents in 1 month if we're actually working on components that control vaccine distribution. But if we're just working on messaging and public perception of vaccines, we might say something like, we will see one influencer tweet whatever message into the information flow network. Or we'll see a 20% increase in the number of people who register their interest in getting the vaccine, within a set period of time. And so those are all very unique and specific to the goals of the campaign. And that's something we do well here is work with our clients to ensure we have the right indicators that we can actually track and show evidence of change.
Absolutely. And we can track and react as it's unfolding, and they're meeting our indicators or not meeting our indicators that we establish with clients. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. That was excellent knowledge drop there. I always learn new things, even though we're all on the same team every time we talk. I love it. Does anyone on the call have any questions for the speakers? Wales, go for it. What is your question?
Yeah, a few things. First of all, I think Jimmy Rodriguez hit the nail on the head. You can't just look at one thing like Twitter, because an increasing number of the far right are moving on to Parler and 8kun and things like that. How do you track them? Number two is tracking information is step one. Step two is getting the misinformation corrected in a way people will accept. Now, I've been around a while. Jimmy, I understand EMP. I was chemical core. One of the things I learned also, because my mother was a social worker, is if you don't understand the root cause of why people are buying into fantasies or whatever you want to call them, you're never going to get them to listen to you. There is a deep distrust in the Black community, for example, in Black communities, of vaccines in large part because of the notorious Tuskegee experiment, which I hope everyone is aware of what went on in that.
Very aware.
And the point is, if you're going to get down to why people are agreeing to joining certain groups or believing certain things, you have to find out where they're coming from, what lack of education they have. And believe me, I would apply that more to suburban whites who are buying into QAnon more than I would into, frankly, any Black community with which I'm familiar.
So that is excellent. Thank you for asking. There's two questions there. I heard, how do we track on other sites? And then how do we get people to accept?
Yes.
And I'll let Jimmy answer that second one. The first one, the tracking on sites is really easy nowadays with the technology, connecting to an API or scraping the data. I mean, we have getting it into using an API to get it into a database and then cleaning it from there is pretty standard nowadays. We have an excellent team. Just takes a couple of data scientists to make it work smoothly. And then Jimmy, so it's really about tracking those sites. It's about customer needs. So if it's something that a client wants to track, like another platform, then it's just about connecting to it and figuring out what data to collect. But Jimmy, how do we get people to accept? Because it seems like that. Mm-hmm.
So first, I'll touch on your first point.
Okay.
When we're looking for other platforms, we're also looking in the physical space. We're not sticking to digital space. So we can see what platforms exist in the physical world through creating some sort of dialogue, making relationships. If I have a friend that's really into far right ideology, ethno-nationalist ideology, I will dig deeper and have that discussion and not shut them out of my life. Now that's just because of my own curiosities and all that. But forming relationships is a big piece. Maybe we don't have to do it, but another entity that makes that kind of work happen, we can draw from that information as well. That would then lead us to, okay, where are these conversations taking place? Is it really happening on Parler, or is it happening in someone's living room first? Maybe Greg Johnson is inviting a bunch of people to his living room and listening to what he has to say, and then they take off. Greg Johnson is like, for those that don't know, he's one of the preeminent ideologues of far-right ethno-nationalist thinking. with specific to nonviolent means. Anywho, is that where the conversation is taking place, in those conferences that they have where he speaks and elaborates about his ideological perspectives? And then how does that translate onto the digital space as well? So that's something we like to keep abreast of, and not just be hyper-focused on social media, but where are those conversations taking place elsewhere, and who's having them, and you know, who can we talk to or listen to that's going to guide us into that new in that space that we haven't heard about yet. The how piece, right? A lot of people talk about narrative using a story-based type technique that helps to break down that rooted perspective. But it's one of those things that if we really knew that, the how to, then, you know, whoever discovers that has to get several Nobel Peace Prizes. And I mean, that's an elusive task.
Yeah.
We can get close to it for sure, but there's things we got to look at, like Cialdini's influence principles. So there's about 6-7 principles that Dr. Cialdini researched, professor out of Arizona State, Emeritus, I believe. And so he has spent maybe 20-30 years researching influence. He comes from a private sector perspective, but he observed like these general principles that people are responding to, stuff like liking. If you know, if someone gets you to like them, they're going to have more influence over you. Where I lost my train of thought, but
how
there's also authority, deference to authority, and how people can use authority as a means of influence. So there's this different principles that take place. We have to look at that. Then we have to look at those cultural, historical components as well, and come up with a little package that has multiple layers, and addresses the complexity of humans.
Katie, were you going to say something? Jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, kind of in summary, that disinformation campaigns, I think, really understand the breakdown of communities and those different environments in which people are receiving information. And on the other side of the coin, messaging campaigns need to do the same thing and understand that core, like, reason, as you mentioned, and really target that. And the messaging campaign can't, I would say maybe sometimes it can be, but most of the time it needs to be targeted and specific to different audiences.
Excellent. Thanks, Wells, for asking the question. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
any other questions? Yeah, great questions. You were very focused on what we were saying, so I really appreciate that. Any other questions on the call before we close out? All right. Well, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure talking with the panelists and hearing the question asked by Wells. I really appreciate it. It was a great session. We're going to do another session pretty much monthly, maybe every other month or so. But Wells and Jin Yang will invite you again. And to the team, I look forward to the next one. Thank you all so much for being very prepared. Really appreciate it. Hope you all have a good day.
Thank you for
inviting me.
participating. Thank you.